Welcome to the deep dive. So if you were following the news in late 2025, you probably remember this, a cultural thunderbolt that just hit the heart of Washington, D.C.
Hmm.
The John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts,
Yeah.
one of the nation's most revered cultural institutions, was suddenly renamed.
That's right. The Board of Trustees voted to rename it the Trump Kennedy Center.
And it happened so fast.
Unbelievably fast. The White House announced it on December 18th, and then with just astonishing speed, the new signs were physically on the building the very next day.
Which is really what set everything off. It wasn't just a political firestorm. It was this profound constitutional and cultural conflict.
Because it's not just about a name on a building. I mean, this goes much deeper.
Exactly. The original name, the Kennedy Center, that wasn't just a board decision. It was set by an explicit act of Congress in 1964. Public Law 88260, specifically calling it a living memorial to JFK.
And that legislative history is the absolute key to this whole crisis.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we're really asking a fundamental question. Who owns our history and our national symbols?
Our mission today is to unpack all of it. The center's complicated legal origins, the sudden and radical institutional overhaul in 2025, and then the legal and artistic rebellion that just erupted right after.
We're looking at how a monument defined and protected by federal law can just be unilaterally altered, or at least how an attempt was made.
Right.
So to really understand the weight of this name change, we have to go back. We have to grasp how central the Kennedy Center is, not just culturally, but politically.
And we often think of it as being all about JFK, but the idea is actually much, much older than that.
It goes back decades, right?
All the way back to the Great Depression, believe it or not. The concept for a national cultural center really started around 1933, and it was championed by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
And her vision wasn't just about art, it was also economic.
Exactly. It was about using the Emergency Relief and Civil Works Administration to put artists, musicians, actors, put them back to work.
So from its very roots, it was tied to civic action and federal support, not just private money.
Precisely. And that ambition finally got its legal footing in 1958. President Eisenhower signed the National Cultural Center Act. But that was just the framework, really.
The real transformation came after November 1963.
Yeah. After the assassination, Congress moved incredibly fast to make sure the center would become this permanent, tangible tribute to him.
And that's when the federal money came in, the $23 million.
That's it. That 1964 law, Public Law 88260, it didn't just rename the structure. It designated it as a living memorial. And that phrase is crucial. It directly linked federal money to keeping it a memorial forever.
It cemented this dual identity. It's a place for art, but it's also a federal monument.
And you can see that tension, that dual purpose, right in the architecture. Edward Durell Stone's original design, it had to project this monumental weight.
Oh, it certainly does. You can't miss it. 3,700 tons of white Carrara marble?
A diplomatic from Italy, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you walk inside, and the grand foyer is just staggering.
It's designed to be overwhelming.
It is. It stretches 630 feet. I mean, to put that in perspective for you, that makes it one of the largest single rooms in the entire world. It's sending a message.
What's the message?
That this is not just another theater. This is a national shrine.
But the idea of a living memorial means it has to evolve. It can't just be a static shrine. Which brings us to the 21st century.
Right, the 2019 expansion, the Reach.
Designed by Stephen Hall Architects, and it feels completely different.
It was a deliberate contrast. Stone's original building is massive, it's closed off, it's all marble. The Ricci's are all about transparency, public access, engagement.
It really emphasizes the living part of that original phrase.
Exactly. It moved the idea from honoring Kennedy's memory with a grand hall to honoring his ethos, his ambition, and his engagement.
You see it in the names of the spaces inside?
You do. They have the Moonshot Studio, which is a makerspace that honors his goal of landing on the moon, and the PT-109 room.
Named for his torpedo boat in World War II.
Right, so these are all very contemporary ways of saying this memorial is active. It's about education. It's about the artistic process itself.
And that context makes what happened in 2025 so much more disruptive. It feels like an attack on the institution's very identity.
It really does. It attacks it as both a monument and as a dynamic cultural space.
Which brings us right to 2025. This institution, which for decades prided itself on stability, on consensus across different administrations, suddenly faced this rapid, dramatic upheaval.
It all started with a leadership change early in the year.
The timeline is just aggressive.
It is. In early February, President Trump fired nearly half of the center's board of trustees. Now, he was entitled to do that under certain provisions, but he then immediately appointed new members.
And just 2 days later.
Just 2 days later, on February 12th, he was elected chairman of the board by those very same newly appointed members. And right after that, Richard Grenell was named interim executive director.
That's an incredible consolidation of political control over a major cultural institution in, what, a matter of weeks?
And the changes were immediate. The new leadership's mandate was very clear. They wanted to move away from content they were calling degenerate art or woke programming.
And this had real-world consequences for their calendar.
Oh, absolutely. For example, several high-profile World Pride events that were scheduled for mid-2025, they were abruptly canceled.
I remember that story about the musician Yasmin Williams.
Yes, that really illustrates the new approach. She's a composer, and she emailed the executive director to express her concern about them rolling back diversity and inclusion initiatives.
And the response.
He reportedly replied that he cut the DEI bullshit because they couldn't afford niche programming the public wouldn't support. So it signaled a really clear shift in priorities.
Away from cultural diversity and towards, I guess, a perceived political alignment.
Exactly. And all of that really set the stage for what came next, the renaming.
On December 18th, 2025, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt makes the announcement. She claims the board voted unanimously to rename the building the Trump Kennedy Center.
And the rationale they gave was all framed around fiscal stewardship.
Right. They argued the president had done, quote, unbelievable work in saving the building,
citing his efforts to secure $257 million in funding for renovations. The subtext was pretty clear. We saved the building, so we've earned the naming rights.
And the sheer speed of it all, that's what made it feel less like a formal decision and more like just a political power play.
The new sign was up the next day, the Donald J. Trump and the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts.
Which doesn't leave any room for debate or for a legal challenge to stop it beforehand.
No, it creates a physical fact on the ground. It shifts the burden to the opponents. Now they have to fight to remove a sign that's already there instead of blocking a decision before it happens.
Which brings us to the core legal conflict. You have a politically appointed board claiming a unanimous vote to rename the center.
But then you have a federal statute, Public Law 88260, that established the original name. So the question becomes very simple.
Can a board just override an act of Congress?
Well, in the eyes of many legal experts, the answer is a very loud no.
Right.
Georgetown law professor David Super and, numerous Democratic lawmakers all argued that the board simply didn't have the statutory authority.
Because if Congress names a national memorial by law,
then only a new act of Congress can legally change that name. Yeah. One legal scholar put it very bluntly. He just said any change by the board wouldn't be legal.
Well, let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's look at the counter-argument they were using. If the president and his new board did secure that $257 million, a huge investment,
Sure.
doesn't that give them some level of operational or maybe even moral authority to make these kinds of decisions?
And that's where the argument pivots from law to governance.
Yeah.
The board controls day-to-day operations, they control capital improvements, and they rely on that federal money for maintenance.
No.
But controlling the operational funds is not the same as controlling the statutory definition of the memorial itself. The legal framework treats the name as something sacred, protected by that 1964 law, and totally separate from the board's other responsibilities.
And this gets even more complicated when you look at another law, one from 1983, about adding things to the building.
Ah, yes, that statute is very precise. It explicitly prohibits installing additional memorials or plaques in the public areas of the Kennedy Center.
So the legal fight becomes about the definition of a plaque.
It does. The critical legal question is whether this new sign adding the Donald J. Trump "and" to the main facade counts as adding a memorial or plaque.
Opponents would argue it absolutely does.
Of course. They argue that by putting a living president's name next to Kennedy's, you're fundamentally transforming the monument into a new dual memorial, and that, they say, violates the 1983 statute.
It's a very clever legal challenge. It uses a law that was designed to protect the memorial to fight the name change right now, even if the main argument about the 1964 law takes longer to resolve in court.
Exactly. It attacks the physical implementation of the decision. And speaking of challenges, that claim of a unanimous board vote, it fell apart almost immediately.
Because of U.S. Representative Joyce Beatty. She's an ex officio member of the board.
And she publicly stated that she was, quote, muted on the call and not allowed to speak or voice my opposition to this move.
Now, an ex officio member is often non-voting, but she's there as a representative of Congress. Her being silenced carries a lot of weight.
It completely undermined the White House's narrative of consensus. And then House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries jumped in, reinforcing the position of Congress.
What did he say?
He stated unequivocally that the board has no authority to actually rename the Kennedy Center in the absence of legislative action.
Which brings us back to something that happened earlier. There were previous attempts to do this, and they actually tried to go through Congress.
They did. There was an earlier bill. It ultimately failed, but it was called the Make Entertainment Great Again Act.
And it aimed to do what, exactly?
To rename the institution, the Donald J. Trump Center for Performing Arts. The very fact that that bill even existed proves that, at one point, even supporters of the name change understood that legislative authority was the proper way to do it.
It also puts this renaming into a larger pattern of what was happening in late 2025.
Yes, context is key here. Just a few weeks earlier, the U.S. Institute of Peace Building, which is a nonpartisan federal institution, was renamed the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace.
So this wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a broader, more systematic effort.
A deliberate effort to affix a specific political name to national institutions, often without broad political consensus.
So the reaction from the artistic community and from the Kennedy family, it wasn't just, political condemnation. It was this emotional and very practical rejection of this new identity.
Oh, for the Kennedy family, this was deeply, deeply personal.
And their response seemed designed to elevate the center above just everyday politics.
That's a great way to put it. Joe Kennedy III, JFK's grandnephew, he made a powerful comparison. He said, "It can no sooner be renamed than can someone rename the Lincoln Memorial no matter what anyone says."
That comparison, putting the Kennedy Center on the same level as the Lincoln Memorial, that really tells you everything about the stakes for the family.
It does. Maria Shriver, JFK's niece, was just as forceful. She called the decision beyond comprehension and fundamentally unacceptable.
But the most dramatic response probably came from Carrie Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy's daughter.
Yes, she vowed to personally contest the change.
She said she'd remove it herself.
She vowed that she would personally remove the new signage with a pickaxe. Now, obviously, she likely meant that figuratively.
You would hope.
But it conveyed the absolute depth of their opposition. They saw it as an illegitimate act, like vandalism against a family legacy and a national tribute.
And beyond the powerful words, the artistic community protested in a very tangible way. They voted with their feet.
The exodus was immediate and financially painful for the center. The national tour of the musical Hamilton, a massively popular and profitable show, canceled its entire scheduled engagement in protest.
That sends a huge message.
It's a clear signal from the arts world that they would not lend their cultural legitimacy to the newly named center.
And it wasn't just one show. Entire institutions pulled out.
That's right. Washington Performing Arts, a huge local organization that really relies on Kennedy Center venues, announced it was moving its whole 2025-2026 season somewhere else.
That's a massive loss of revenue and cultural presence.
Huge. And we'd already seen signs of this tension earlier in the year, even before the name change, when cast members withdrew from a June performance of Les Miserables that the president was planning to attend.
So the collective message from the artists was that this new political stewardship was just fundamentally undermining the cultural mission of the venue.
It ties right back to that core tension we talked about. The center relies on these private cultural institutions to survive financially, but it now has this new, very stark political alignment.
And when the cultural institutions walk away,
then the center's living function is severely compromised, no matter how much federal money it has for maintenance.
And before the full renaming, there were also other, more targeted efforts on specific parts of the building.
Yes, the Opera House was an earlier target. In July 2025, Republicans on a House subcommittee proposed an amendment to a spending bill, again, showing they knew legislative action was needed to rename one of the theaters the Melania Trump Opera House.
That measure failed, but it showed an ongoing strategy.
A coordinated strategy to rebrand the physical structure, piece by piece if they had to.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we have to come back to that central conflict. The Kennedy Center has always had to navigate this tension.
Between its two identities, it's a cultural institution sustained by the very unpredictable world of ticket sales and private philanthropy.
And it's a federal memorial supported by stable but sometimes politically motivated federal funds.
And this renaming effort has just thrown that tension into a full-blown existential legal crisis.
And I think it's crucial for you, our listener, to remember the immediate legal reality here. As of late December 2025, despite that physical sign on the building, legally, the institution is still the